Hello, everyone, and welcome to our March Improving Lives Through Art virtual art tour, the second event of the MSAA Spring 2022 Improving Lives Through Art series. My name is Joe Caliva, and I will once again be your host and tour guide this evening. And tonight, I am coming to you live from Rome, Italy. I'm fortunate enough to be here doing some research and, of course, enjoying some great food and wine. The only downside, however, is the time difference. It's a little after 1 a.m. Italian time right now, but that's okay. I am pumped full of Italian coffee and wide awake. Tonight, we are continuing to explore and learn about artists whose lives have been improved through their art and who continue to improve the lives of others through their work. All of tonight's guests are living with MS, like many of you watching tonight, and all of them are featured artists in the MSAA Art Showcase. Tonight's program will run about 90 minutes, and be sure to stay until the end because the artists themselves will be here for some discussion and to answer your questions live. But as always, before we officially get started, I'd like to hand the mic over to the president and CEO of MSAA, Ms. Gina Murdoch, for a special message to kick things off. Gina?
Thank you so much for joining us for our first tour in our Improving Lives Through Art Spring Series. We cannot thank you enough for your support. My deepest thanks and appreciation to all the amazing artists who are joining us tonight. We have Alfred Heyman, Lisa Dominic, Tom Brzezinski, Michelle Roman, and Hannah Garrison. And again, thank you to Joe for taking us through tonight's tour. I am so excited to learn about these artists alongside of you. Please know that MSAA could not continue to provide free programs and services and innovate to meet the needs of the MS community without your support. Again, thank you to our amazing sponsor, Publicis. I am ready to go, excited to learn, so back to you, Joe.
Thank you so much, Gina. As always, before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple things to make sure tonight's presentation is a pleasant experience for everyone. First, I'm sure you noticed that your audio and video has been turned off. This is to reduce background noise and distractions. However, we do encourage you to post your questions for the artists using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And depending on time, I will ask your question at the end of the broadcast or possibly allow you to ask it yourself. You can also use the chat feature to communicate with everyone watching live tonight. For example, go ahead and type in the chat where you are tuning in from tonight, and we'll give you a shout out a little later. And finally, as always, I'd like to echo Gina's gratitude to our wonderful sponsor, Publicis Health, for not only making tonight's event possible, but the entire Improving Lives Through Art series as well. Thank you to Publicis Health for your ongoing support of MSAA. And now, let's meet the first of our 5 artists this evening, Lisa Dominic, who lives in my hometown of Philadelphia. But Lisa, you were originally from Florida, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So I was born in Florida, but my parents moved to Philadelphia when I was just 2 years old. So Philadelphia is my home. I was raised here, and I went to college here. I went to Temple University, and I worked as a nurse here at Einstein Medical Center and University of Pennsylvania. And
so you studied and worked in the medical field, but when did you first discover your creative side?
You know what? I think I've always been creative. My mom recently gave me a picture of a cat that I drew when I was like 9 years old, and she saved that all this time because she just kind of felt that art was going to be where I would go. But, you know, I went about my life just kind of, you know, doing art on the side. It was something more personal for me.
What changed that? What was the spark that made you think your art could be something more than just something you did on the side?
I was volunteering at church. Like they have like vacation Bible school, and you know, you would have to paint things. And this one year they were doing like an outdoor Christmas, like a drive-through nativity, but it was like basically you drove through and they had scenes that were painted and different things. And I remember clearly this gentleman, I didn't really know him personally, but he just said, oh, he's like, you know, what I was painting, he was like, oh, that's really great. He's like, how long have you been like a professional artist? And I'm like, dude, I'm not an artist, I'm a nurse. Like, and he's like, oh, you know, well, you should look into that, like, kind of. And so years go by, and you know, and then you get MS and you're not working as a nurse anymore.
So this stranger planted the seed of possibility, but it was MS that really altered the course of your career and life. Could you talk a little more about that and what led to your diagnosis?
In 2002, I got my diagnosis in 2008 after being somewhat of a medical mystery. I probably still am a little bit of a medical mystery, but I had lost the vision in my right eye, actually both eyes, not full. I didn't lose like all of my vision, but I was definitely having an emergency with my eyesight. And I also became numb from the waist down, and right-sided weakness. And it led to seeing many doctors over the course of three or 4 years before they finally settled on this was definitely the only thing left that this could be would be MS. But I used to be able to multitask all these things and, you know, be a nurse and be a wife and be a mom. And, you know, when you're sick, you can't do that, or I couldn't do that anymore. And, you know, so life changed.
I'm sure. Leaving your nursing career because of your MS, is that when you decided to focus more on your painting or your art?
When after I was diagnosed and I had stopped working, my mom had been up in the Bucks County area, and she had seen paintings by Ty Danish. He's a local artist, and sadly he passed away from cancer recently. But he had a little sign out in his studio that he taught painting classes. And my mom my mom bought me a class. So she thought, I guess that goes back to the cat thing. She thought maybe that would be something helpful. So she bought me a class with Ty Danish. And it was really nice. It was a plein air class. And when I was a kid, one of my school trips to the art museum, I bought a poster of the Monet woman with the parasol. And that was hanging in my bedroom, like all growing up. I think I had Sean Cassidy poster too, but
Monet and Sean Cassidy.
That's yes. And combo. Yeah, so Ty is an impressionist painter, And so it really kind of resonated with me because it was the colors and, just bright and happy and yeah, hopeful.
Yeah, there's nothing like bright, vibrant colors to lift your mood and give you a sense of hope like that. Lisa, how did you first become aware of MSAA? Was it through the art showcase or did you find out about that later?
Um, I I became aware of the MSAA when an aunt who had MS as well needed durable medical equipment, and that was like a resource that we used to help her at at home. I've known about the MSAA and I've seen the art showcases, but I never was brave enough to share my work publicly. The past 5 years have been really like kind of a roller coaster with the art. My husband is a Philadelphia police detective, and they had art in City Hall. So my husband actually said, "Hey, why don't you take some of your paintings and put them in here?" So he kind of encouraged me. And so I did. And I actually won a prize for a painting that I did of him. That having that experience actually made me consider myself an artist now and not a patient.
Well, let's jump into some of your work featured in the MSAA Art Showcase. I'd like to start with this piece titled Hearth and Heaven. It is such an idyllic little landscape with this rustic looking house and the warm colors in the trees and the window of the house. It looks like you can see the light from the hearth through the window. Is this a real place? And could you tell us a little bit more about the painting?
The painting Hearth and Heaven was done at the Phillips Mill in New Hope, Pennsylvania. They have this delightful little area that are little sample homes. The architects there put their, it's like a showcase. It's like a showcase for the architects. And it just looks like a cute little English village. It's like so charming. It's almost like you step back in time, even though you're just, right around the corner. I went there with a class, with a plein air class, and I never knew that existed. So we spent time there painting these cute little houses and the mill, the grist mill that everybody loves to paint. It's like kind of a quaint little area in Bucks County. It's not an accident that it's got the orange and the warmth because it was painted last fall. And I think all of the paintings that I submitted have this theme of like coming home and fall and Thanksgiving and something that everybody can relate to, and something, right, that's like kind of universal.
It certainly is universal. And speaking of your theme of coming home, another of your paintings in the showcase is actually titled Welcome Home. It looks like a similar scene as Hearth and Home, but the door is actually open in this one, which certainly makes it look more welcoming and inviting. Where was this painted, and did you actually get to go inside this home?
That was a little bit of artistic license, I guess. But I wanted to go inside that little house. And that's also in the same area at the Phillips Mill, one of these like little sample homes. And yeah, just super, super cute and almost like timeless.
Yeah, that's a perfect word for these little homes and rustic scenes. Timeless. Your style of painting also has that timeless quality. The third piece from your showcase, titled Sanctuary's Gate, again is a similar looking scene with not an open door, but an open gate, inviting the viewer into the scene. Where was this one painted?
It honestly, they're all painted from the same place. And that was in fall too. Yeah, it was
Really?
all
Okay.
it was all during like the same time frame.
And these were all finished in one sitting, just in plein air.
They were 90%, I would say, in plein air. And then, when I got home, I kind of cleaned up the edges and tried not to overdo them. That's
Right.
when I'm painting. I feel like I could paint forever. And if you do that with one painting too long, you wind up kind of ruining what you set out to accomplish in the first place. So I've learned over time that I need to get things done and move on, right? So we're not dwelling on the one piece too long, because in the end, an overdone artwork isn't good.
Yeah, that's the beauty of painting in plein air or alla prima, which means in one sitting. It forces you to concentrate only on what is most important, not to get hung up in the details, which, like you said, could actually ruin a piece.
Knowing when to stop when you're working on a painting and say that it's finished and move on is one of the things that I've had to work on as I've developed my style as an artist, or and it's kind of like life. I think art's like life, right? Art's it's like each painting is like a challenge to like overcome or to document, or I don't know. Learning to paint is a lot like learning to live. You get better at it.
Well said. And that's the perfect note to end on. Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. The MSAA Art Showcase features many types of art, not just painting, and our next artist is proof of that. Artist number 2, tell us a little about yourself and the art that you create.
Okay. My name is Alfred Heyman. I'm from the greater Los Angeles area, and some people consider me a photographer. Myself, I said that I wouldn't classify myself as a photographer until I sold something. So I call myself a photographer these days because I've sold things. So if that makes any sense. I've been into photography since I was a kid, but I really didn't get serious about it until much later in life. I guess people have these second childhoods, or you have midlife crisis or different things like that. Or I guess you get to a point where you finally start to listen to the muse in your head and follow it, So for me, photography was kind of that muse or that creative outlet for me. So
It sounds similar to Lisa's story, only doing art, or in your case, photography, as a hobby or on the side. Did you ever try studying photography in a formal setting?
yes, I did. In college, I actually took a photography class and got a heap of darkroom experience and exposure. And also at the same time, I had such a bad experience with my photography instructor. I can't remember the person's name, but just their approach to how they teach just really turned me off to the point where I had really gotten out of, the joy of it. I think I just like put all my photography gear back into a box after the class was done, and just like set it on a shelf or put it in a box in my mom's garage for like a few years. And to have someone off the bat to discourage you and dismiss your work because they may not comprehend what you're trying to, the stories that you're trying to tell.
Right.
That just really put me in a weird space. And I was just like, well, if this is what photography is about, I'll just go fly a kite or something. I'll do something else.
It is a sad fact that for as many stories you hear of teachers or instructors inspiring their students, there are some who have the opposite effect, actually turning a student away from an artistic pursuit. I want to hear what brought you back to photography, but first, could you tell us when you first received your MS diagnosis and what happened to cause you to get tested?
I was diagnosed in 2011 or 2012. And, prior to that, I just wasn't feeling quite right. And I didn't know if it was a thing where I wasn't getting enough sleep or I wasn't eating properly, or there was just something really different. My wife had suggested why didn't I go to her doctor? So anyways, I had described my symptoms to my wife's doctor, and he said, "Have you ever been tested for MS?" And I just kind of sat there with my mouth open, and I'm like, "No, I don't think I have that, and I don't. It doesn't run in my family, and I've always been pretty athletic, and so on and so on." So I was just thinking like it couldn't be that. So he was like, "Well, let's just err on the side of caution, and I want to get you screened." So he had me submit to a lot of the testing and things. So, um, long story short, it came back that I did have MS, and it took me about maybe a good month or so just to kind of really digest it. And I sat down with my wife and my kids, and we were like, well, we're all in this together, and we're going to try and work this out. Thankfully, we got the diagnosis when we did, so we're proactively treating it.
Was it your diagnosis or living with MS in general that brought you back to photography?
Once I got the diagnosis, we started doing more. We started doing more family road trips, more things like that. And as we were like seeing, the countryside, going to some of the national parks and things like that, or just like going on cruises, just different things. It just kind of like, they just kind of, my light bulb just went on again. And it was like, wow, we're going to all these neat places and we're seeing all these different things, I should take some pictures. And when I would get home from the vacations, and I would download the pictures or look at them on the computer, my wife, she would lean over my shoulder and was like, well, it's kind of nice there, or, you may have something here. And I really didn't think too much about it. And she was like, have you ever thought about showing your work? I really have to give my wife credit with, she's the one that really kind of like pushed me into this. So, I would like to say that, I had the ideal all myself, and it was all my own thinking, and but it wasn't. Wives are much smarter than the men are. So,
Well, I would tend to agree with you, but I am noticing a pattern already tonight. Lisa said it was her husband that really encouraged her to submit her work to the art show at City Hall. You said it was your wife who encouraged you to show your work. I think it just proves that many times it's our significant others or those who love us most who see things in us that we often don't see in ourselves. Alfred, when did you first hear about MSAA and the art showcase?
Actually, I got a magazine in the mail, and I think I had signed up for it. I think I had filled out one of those response cards in my neurologist's office. So I guess eventually in time they sent me a magazine, and that's why I found out about this organization. And there was I think there was a blurb in the back saying something about the art contest, and that was kind of how I found out about this actually. So it was just completely random. So
Well, I'm certainly glad you filled out that response card. Let's jump into some of your work featured in the showcase. This first piece, titled Industrial Micro Terraces, is a beautiful black and white shot with these wonderfully symmetrical doors and windows. Could you talk a little about where this was taken and what inspired this shot?
there's so much construction going on in Southern California right now for the past few years, and it just seems that all of these mixed use structures are just popping up overnight. It seems. My wife and I we were shopping for shoes in Pasadena, and we were coming out of the shoe store, and I happened to see that shot, and I just thought to myself like, huh, that might look like something, you know. So I just made a note to myself to come back to that same place with my gear, and I did. And I guess when you look at it and you look at the number of doors and windows and the little terrace, the little micro terrace, if you can call it that, or this little a little balcony terrace, you can't put too much out there. Maybe you could have a little folding chair and like maybe a little small table and not much more else. And if you look at the amount of windows and doors and things, there's like tons and tons of these things. So people are like living on top of each other and side by side. And it's almost like if you're having a conversation with yourself, your neighbor next door to you and above you and right below you, they're all going to be hearing your conversation.
I think that's what jumped out at me and was really appealing to me. There's something very European, or at least Italian, about those very closely stacked apartments or flats. Instead of spaces being spread out, they are spread up in densely populated urban areas. And speaking of urban areas, there is something very urban or industrial about this next piece titled Spartan Artist Loft. Where was this taken?
I took that shot in downtown LA, and if you know anything about downtown Los Angeles, at the turn of the century, not this century, but the turn of the 20th century, so you're looking maybe like 1890 something to like 1905, there were a lot of industrial factory buildings in and around Los Angeles, and throughout the years, some of them have become disused. And I guess in the last 15 years or so, these old factory buildings have, found renewed life as condos or artist lofts. Even they charge people high dollar to rent these spaces, and it's kind of like a live-in space where you have a box where you have your place where you sleep at night and where you create your work, and then you have a shared kitchen space or shared bathroom space. And that's why I think that's why I was thought like Spartan artists lofts, because they're not a nice, large, spacious place to call home. They're just enough space to create. When I saw that the light coming through that window, and there was a nail in the wall. I was showing at a space not far from there, so I had some of my pieces, some of my frame pieces, wet with me. And when I saw that little nail in the wall, I grabbed one of them and just like stuck it up on the wall there. So if you look at that piece there, you'll see that there's actually a picture in the back, and that's one of my pictures. So I thought it was like kind of a nice.
That's a time-honored artist tradition of putting a piece within a piece. And I have to say, my first studio in Philadelphia was in a converted rubber factory. So that's a common practice in many large cities. Now, this final piece is the complete opposite of the last two. Instead of stacked living spaces or industrial studio lofts, this has a feeling of infinite space in an almost empty or barren landscape. Was this also taken near Los Angeles?
We were returning from a road trip. We had gone up north. I think we went to the Sequoia National Forest, and we were kind of getting low on gas, so we had pulled over, or we were like going to take the off ramp just to get gas. And the same thing that you're looking at in that piece, I just saw that, and I just rolled down the window and grabbed my camera, and I just asked my wife to slow down because she was driving at the time, because we take turns driving. And I just asked her to slow down so I could just kind of grab that shot. And I really didn't think much about it. I just was just trying to kind of capture everything that I was seeing in my mind, but I just remember that the clouds looked really funky. And, I was like saying to myself, like, I wonder if we were to make a right turn and just like keep driving up this road, this strange road, driving towards those clouds, like what we might find, and it's just kind of a foreboding thing. Like you may like end up like driving to an old abandoned farmhouse or ranch house, and like one of these kind of Nightmare on Elm Street type of scenarios, or The Hills Have Eyes, or Friday the 13th or something, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It does have that foreboding quality to it. And it's a great example of never knowing when inspiration is going to strike. So always be looking and always be prepared. Alfred, is there anything you wanted to say in closing?
I want to thank the MSAA for this platform to help people showcase their art. I think this is a good thing, and it helps us a lot. Just to have an outlet where you can really go and like share your work with other people. That really means a lot.
It certainly does. And it means a lot that you were with us here tonight. Thank you, Alfred. The MSAA Art Showcase features a diverse community of artists with cultural backgrounds and artistic voices that are every bit as unique as their MS journeys. Our next artist tonight, Ms. Michelle Roman, is a shining example of that. Michelle, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us when your artistic journey began?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So my name is Michelle Roman. I was born in Puerto Rico, in a tiny town called Bayamon. I've always been interested in art. I was always surrounded by it. My brother was always been an artist. I have one of he passed away, but he used to be an artist too. Right now, I'm living in Massachusetts. Always cold here, but I like it no matter what. And right now I'm just focusing in 3 type of art, which would be acrylics, photography, and alcohol ink. But right now, my what I've been working the most is being alcohol ink. Those are in the back. So yeah, so that's basically what I've been doing recently. Yeah.
We will definitely talk more about your work in a few minutes. But could you start by telling us a little about your MS journey? When were you first diagnosed and what led up to that?
When I first got my symptoms, I didn't take that seriously. And one day I was talking to one of my coworkers because I was like a little bit unbalanced. And he was like, I think you should talk to your doctor about that. That seems very, something to talk about with him, with her. So I went to the doctor and I explained my situation, and with no hesitation, she concluded that it was in my head. Just like that. Typical. It's sad, but it's very common for MSers, that they got they first got misdiagnosed. So eventually I moved here. I moved here in Massachusetts in 2011. And by the next year, like 2 months after I got my 30th birthday, I got my diagnosed. In that period, it was winter, right? And with the winter, with the cold and all that stuff, I noticed that my body was going like even more unbalanced than usual, at the point that I was falling constantly. And I was getting like weakness and all this crazy stuff. And I was like, I cannot be imagining all these things, it's gotta be a reason. So yeah, so I got to say I was really lucky. Like, I got like a very good team of doctors that they were wise enough to refer me to the right ones, because sometimes like doctors make the mistake like, oh, I don't know what's going on, there's nothing here, end of story. Sadly that happens sometimes. But that, again, thanks universe, that wasn't my situation. So I would say like from that point, I got my diagnosis very, very quick. So yeah.
That does seem to be a common thread with many people living with MS, that they were misdiagnosed at first or went through a series of misdiagnoses. So I'm glad to hear you had a great team of doctors. Now, you said you grew up around a lot of art and were always surrounded by it. But did you seriously pursue art before your MS diagnosis?
I was doing art before, but to be honest, I wasn't so dedicated back then, to be honest with you. Between work and worries and moving, and it's like my mind wasn't set up back then. Ironically, I have to say, like, once that I get my diagnosis, I realized that, sadly in one part, I had to stop working, but at the same time, it gave me the opportunity to be more dedicated. And that's when I actually went back to school. I graduated from visual arts. And once from that point, I was able to retake my arts and, being focused. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it seems like a very common thread with many of the MS artists in the MSAA Art Showcase, that it wasn't until after their diagnosis when they became truly passionate about their art. Michelle, when did you first hear about MSAA or become involved with them?
I think, let me see. It was like a long time after. For example, I know I got my diagnosis 9 years ago. So I heard about the MS Association of America, probably 3 years ago, to be honest. Yeah. Which, by the way, I wanted to say, I wanted to thank the organization, because I noticed they, first of all, they give such opportunity for, the artist community with MS, to, have this platform with you, talk a little bit, talk about our symptoms and our things and our art. It's wonderful. And besides that, I wanna be thankful because they have so many services. I was just reading the other day the website. Services, programs, events, you name it. It's wonderful. I want to say thanks for all you're doing, guys. So Yeah.
Well, I will echo your gratitude to MSAA, Michelle. And I agree. It's quite a remarkable thing that this organization not only provides valuable resources and services to help those living with MS with their basic healthcare needs, but goes above and beyond to provide a unique platform like this to nurture creativity and improve overall wellness. Not to mention providing artists with a unique place to connect with other artists and art lovers and share their work. What about your work, Michelle? Has your MS influenced or impacted the way you create?
So unlike other artists that maybe they try to uh, bring the topic of MS into their work, maybe I don't do that directly, but what I actually do once I'm doing my art is that I'm trying to use it. First of all, I'm trying to use it as a therapeutic way to free my, you know, my issues, you know, like you name it, like anxiety or anger or frustration. You know, I think art in any way, it's a great way to, you know, to flush that out, you know. And in second place, I try to use my art like, you know, like to bring some good energy to other people, you know. um, I always like to try to use like vibrant colors, or sometimes I try to, on the other hand, I try to use like more like, all depends, you know, colors, like depending on what I want to project. I believe in the theory of colors, you know, like certain colors will give you certain emotion will get, you know. So so I always try to connect with my colors in order to receive like a, to take some reaction out of the people or get some energy out of the people. So yeah.
Well, let's talk more about your work that's featured in the MSAA Art Showcase, starting with this piece titled Be Here, Be Now. It's a wonderfully abstract piece that looks like a river or an eruption of color. Can you tell us a little more about your inspiration for this piece or your process to create it?
And in that one, I was actually trying to, or I wanted to people to feel that peace of mind. You know, that's what I try to use, like more like blue, light colors, like, you know, I think in that one I use like blue, purple, well, the orange, the yellow, I know it's like a little bit like out of the out of that pattern, right? But I use that color in order to get some contrast. But that's what I was actually trying to. That's what I want the people to feel when I see they're the one. You know, to feel like the uh, peacefulness. Uh, you know, being peaceful when they see it. So yeah, so I try to use those colors for that reason. Yeah.
Now, as you mentioned earlier, you are a multidisciplinary artist, working not just in paints, but with photography as well. And in this second piece from the showcase titled Once Upon a Time, I love this extraordinary close up detailed view of a dandelion. Do you do a lot of macro photography?
Yeah, I took that with a macro lens. But what I would say, like the reason why I actually like doing my micro photography lately is because it gives me like a different perspective. You know, like, you know, from here, from this distance, like you could see one thing, but once you get closer, you see like a whole different thing. You know, it's like it gives you like once you see the shot, once you see like all the details.
Yes, that to me is the most remarkable thing about macro photography. The ability it gives you to see something in a way that you'd never otherwise be able to see with the naked eye. And I really like how you shot the dandelion against the darker grass and blurred out blue flowers in the background, which really makes it pop.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just trying to add a little bit of contrast, you know. I mean, even that the white dandelion itself, I think it's beautiful. But I personally, like in whatever I do, I try to use always contrast. Like that way, when an image pop out from the background, I think it gets better. Like people, it gets people's attention better.
Yes, it certainly got my attention. But let's talk about your third piece, titled Simply Be. This is a painting, but it's quite different than the first piece we saw. Abstract, but also somewhat figurative. Could you tell us a little more about this piece?
Oh, actually, yeah. For this one, I used acrylics. That's actually the less that I used. It's really difficult when you're trying to paint for hours and the whole smell is right there. And I don't know other emitters, but for me, heavy smells, it's a big deal. So I don't use that much acrylic these days because of that reason. But this one, it's acrylic. So basically, this one, what represents, it's like, that's mental state. That state of mind. Like when sometimes we just have like difficulties in life. When we're facing difficult times or difficult medical issues, like it's multiple sclerosis, I think like the best thing like we can do is just like simply accept the situation, and I know it sounds like something easy to say, but I got to say, like in my situation, that's something that got me through acceptance, like if that's what it is, well, let it be.
And I really love that the emotion of this piece is conveyed through the subject's body language, through her gesture, intentionally not painting a face, which is normally where a subject conveys emotions, forces the viewer to have to read her body language to try and figure out the emotions in this piece. Was that a conscious choice with this painting?
I don't know. I think it was just the way I just felt it to do it at that moment. But at the same time, I did wanted to focus in the body language, in her position. Like I don't know. Sometimes people when they get worried or pensive or whatever, they tend to do that. Like But yeah, that's basically what it was crossing my head at the point that I was making it.
And I'm sure different viewers will see something different in that pose or gesture.
Yeah, it's like everyone has their own interpretation. I mean, it's like I always like to say, in fact, this is a line from an old movie that I always get stuck in my head. I think it's from one of the Batman movies back in the days. Right. And one of the characters said to the other one, she says like, people see what they want to see. And that always got stuck in my head. People will identify with whatever is in front of them one way or the other. So.
And that is one of the most powerful things about art, in my opinion. What people take away from it very often depends on what they bring to it. Michelle, thank you for your time tonight. Now, so far tonight, we've been jumping back and forth between the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States. So let's head to the Midwest for our next artist this evening. Artist number 4, why don't you tell us a little about your story and how long you've been creating art?
Okay. Well, my name is Tom Brzezinski, and I was born and raised in a city in the Midwest called Austin, Minnesota. It's the home of George A. Hormel, fairly small community. And so I was always very interested in art as a child. And I always got all the art projects per se, whatever was needed in class, and greeting cards and such. And it was always nice to partake in that. And then as time progressed and I was thinking about a career, I decided on a couple of more important careers in the gist of things. For example, psychology, or I wanted to be an airline pilot. But then in the end, I realized that I was happiest painting. And that's something I gravitated to around the time that most men go to college. And I did enter a junior college, but I was aspiring to be an artist and moving forward towards the West Coast. So all my steps from the age of 20 onward led me to Los Angeles. And the career there lasted about 40 years, starting out in the scenic and title artists and theatrical work, working for very old television shows such as Soupy Sales, I'm dating myself, but in black and white, and, Playboy After Dark. And towards the end of my career, I was doing Dances with the Stars and all those really, the latest, greatest shows were being taped at CBS, where I ended my career. So essentially, most of my life has been art. And so it's paradoxical that now in MS, at the end of my, with the MS diagnosis, that I'm still using art in a different way, but not like with my career. It's much more simplistic. And basically, I spend more time, like yourself, with photography and things that are simpler for me to handle. I don't have the time. I don't feel the comfort to paint in front of an easel 24 hours like I used to be able to do. All the aches and pains of old age and multiple sclerosis kick in that alter that.
So you're the first artist tonight who is working as a professional artist before your MS diagnosis, and for a considerably long time. How did your MS diagnosis impact your life, creatively or otherwise?
The impact was shocking, to be honest with you, because what brought me to the doctor was numbness in my left hand. I mean, my right hand, my painting hand. And one thing led to the other. And then I was surprised that I was going down that road. But coincidentally, my sister Diane, who would have been 72 today, was diagnosed with ALS. And so she got a death sentence virtually, where MS has a little leeway through help and such, but she went through a downward spiral in a matter of 2 years. But her eyes, she could see as clear as a bell. I would just stare in her eyes when I was with her. I just noticed that her eyes weren't distressed. They weren't reddened, hurt, and I'm sure she could still see 20/20. It's an important thing, You don't realize a lot of these things until you just lose them. So
Sure.
as long as I can see, that's what keeps us as artists going. Is the
Absolutely.
camaraderie of us all. We can see to one degree or the other.
Has living with MS changed your painting style or how you have to approach a piece?
Well, that's a good question regarding how my work has changed, because I was a very tight, realistic artist most of my career, and doing portraiture and the style that I did with multi images of people in the portrait in the background required the ability to focus on detail. But now my paintings are much more impressionistic. For example, this was a painting that I had recently entered in the contest. It's part of the contest. This was done while I was doing an infusion, an Avenex infusion, which somewhat backfired on me, unfortunately. But that's on a kind of a dark note. But on a happier note, I did this painting of my mother and I. My mother is 94 years old. When we were going to a restaurant during the pandemic, you have your exes 6 feet apart. Okay. She was gracefully opening the door for me, which is very nice. It should be the other way around, But
did you paint the infusion piece while you were receiving the infusion?
No, it was painted from memory, and it wasn't that complicated, so it's pretty, and that's also somewhat crude. But these are recent paintings, like there's another portrait entitled Me, Myself, and I that I did when I was about 18 years of age. So that was the direction I was leading throughout my career. Even if it was theatrical, it was always very highly realistic imagery, hand painted. And then when the computer came along, obviously, had no choice but to move forward with Photoshop and retouching. And so the benefits, and on my little iPhone 12 here, I take hundreds of photographs every day as a walking diary of just things that would make, scrap for future work down the road that I most likely will never get to. But it's still a beautiful tool that's so easily to access so many things that I'm really happy about having that ability. And so that's basically how I'm not working hands-on painting like I did, because these are the only two representations in over 7 years of me literally painting anything. So,
Well, if I can go back to the piece titled Me, Myself, and I for a moment, it's remarkable to me that you were only 18 when you painted this. Several things jump out at me with this painting, but I think the first was the similarity to the artist Rene Magritte and a little of his style of surrealism, with the arm and the green sleeve coming in from off the canvas, painting a self-portrait. But then there's also this third figure from the back. Was Magritte or other artists of that genre influential to you at that age?
yes, I love that you'd say that. Nobody's ever did mention that, but I do appreciate surrealism quite a bit as well. But I can see now that you say that, because it was three different things occurring at once.
Well, the other thing, of course, is how you surround yourself, or the main subject, almost with these ghosts of artists past. From the top left, I believe it's Rembrandt, Pablo Picasso, Albrecht Dürer, Thomas Eakins, Grandma Moses, Andrew Wyeth, and Norman Rockwell. Were all these artists influences or inspirations to you at the time?
They were, in particular, because everything looks more and more like a Norman Rockwell. It was Norman Rockwell that I had met and had a correspondence with during my career. And his work is just out of this world to see it in reality. Nothing compared to mine. And it was nice that he sort of helped me and led me on to think that I could have, position in that field, which I did album covers as well, but I ultimately got into the theatrical respects, and I got away from the commercial end of doing album covers or magazine illustrations or Saturday Evening Night Post cover. But I did do a portrait here of time covers of figures that ended up winning a Emmy Award. This was done for Time Honors, where they had me do portraits of these figures who are artists and entertainers. This is Jim Henson. Once again, I put the imagery around of characters in his life that mattered. And then Bob Dylan is really one of my favorite artists ever, musicians. Among others, I was listening to your music and I thought that has a nice ring to it for somebody who's so diversified in your abilities. So I can't just say Dylan per se. Speaking to somebody who has that ability, because I can't sing. And here with Dylan, it travels his career through Hibbing and all the way up to the top.
It's beautiful work, Tom. And thank you also for your kind words. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before we end tonight?
MS in general, I can say that it's a disease in progress. I'm taking an experimental drug called Vomerity now, which has side effects. So I'm tolerating the side effects, but it still is a ray at the end of the tunnel where potentially there may not be a full cure, but I may be able to live a little longer. And then just this experience with you and looking at and you're including me in this project is a very nice thing to do, that it's vice versa. I really respect and seeing your work. So I'd be happy to do more things. I've done many more paintings that are back in the past that we could talk about as well, if you're looking at that, because the artwork I do today, like I said, is leaning towards the easier side of doing things. Like today I was cooking a beef stew, and then the process of cutting up all the various colorful vegetables and everything, it becomes a harmony of an abstraction of art, color. And, like walking is a form of dance. I don't walk like I used to, kind of float around, but, there's some things I just try to make the best of, and that, like I say, I feel very fortunate I didn't get plagued with ALS, which apparently is somewhere in my genetics. So
Right.
this to me is much simpler, and it's nice to have that contrast in a way. So I could get real depressed about a lot of things, like anybody can.
Well, you're absolutely right. No matter how bad things may seem, they could always be worse. And that's certainly cause to make you feel gratitude. Thank you, Tom, for being with us tonight. And now, our final artist is one with whom many of you may already be familiar. She has been part of the Improving Lives Through Art series since its inception, and she is this year's mission honoree for MSAA's Improving Lives Benefit 2022. This interview was recorded before that announcement was made, but let's find out a little more about our fifth and final artist tonight. Artist number 5, who are you, and when did you start your artistic journey?
Well, I am Hannah, and I'm from San Antonio, Texas, and I have been doing art ever since I could remember, honestly. My mom likes to tell people that I picked up my first crayon at 3 years old and never put them down since. So I've been doing art for a very, very long time.
So after picking up those first crayons, did you move on to other mediums, or did you gravitate toward a particular medium?
Let's see. I would say I gravitated more towards drawing materials. So markers, mostly pencils. I was mostly focused on drawing things and drawing things realistically. Crayons came into the picture, but mostly just when I wanted to scribble something. What else? Color pencils. I actually started to seriously start making more realistic pieces in Prismacolor pencils when I was, I believe, 16. So mostly dry mediums all through high school and then through most of college.
So art had been a lifelong pursuit for you through college and into your career. Could you tell us how long after that was it that you received your MS diagnosis?
Yeah. So my diagnosis happened on June 28th, 2017. So it's only been maybe 4 years or so. I was 27 years old, and I was pretty much at the peak of my artistic journey, I would say, when MS hit.
How did that change your art? Or did it change the way you approached creating your art?
Well, it changed a lot. So as I mentioned previously, I was working towards becoming better at photorealism and just realism in general. So I was pretty good at drawing. I was pretty good at being at looking at perspective and all that good stuff. And so when MS hit, well, I couldn't really think about my art. I couldn't really think in general. It's just my mind became muddied. I couldn't really bring out the proper words. I still struggle with that a little bit, but at the time it was so hard just to walk from the house all the way to my studio in the back. And so it was a lot of logistical things that got in the way of my art making process. So whenever I finally sat down and realized that, okay, this MS thing, it's not going to go away. So I need to figure out, how can I work around it? What can I do to make my artistic life easier? What can I do to work with the mediums to make it easier for me to use them? So I thought about the properties of each of the mediums that I had around me. I had watercolor pencils, I had actual pencils, I had acrylic paints. So I knew already that drawing wasn't going to be an easy task for me. So I would look at things like watercolor, for example, and I'd look at the properties of watercolor. They spread. If the water, the pigment, it spreads. And what can I do to use those properties to my advantage? So I would take watercolor pencils, and on that particular day, if I was feeling like just scribbling, I could just scribble with those watercolor markers. Then I could take the water and I could try and direct the paint as much as I could. But if not, it's going to do what it's going to do. And I have to be okay with that. And so being okay with my brush strokes, being okay with whatever came out from that art session helps me to be okay with my MS diagnosis, because I needed to be okay with my MS diagnosis if I was ever going to grow as a person. I needed to be able to accept it. And so the art making process helped with that idea. And from that point, after sort of using the arts and the mediums themselves to, to build up that hand-eye coordination. Because I knew at the time that hand-eye coordination and neural pathways, could be made. I could make those new neural pathways, by repetition. And so the art I actually feel like I've gotten a lot better because of that repetition. And it helps that that it's rewarding too. I'm able to reward myself, and that's always a essential to learning, is being able to be rewarded. So that idea behind, that simple idea behind neurology actually really helped me to push forward through my diagnosis and through my own healing process.
Thank you for sharing all that, Hannah. That's remarkable. The fact that art helped you heal both physically or neurologically, as you said, and emotionally after receiving your MS diagnosis. And you said that it was only about 4 years ago that you received your diagnosis. How long after that did you become involved with MSAA? Did you hear about them first through the art showcase, or were you aware of them before that?
Which one came first, the MSAA art showcase or MSAA in general? I would say, I think I discovered the MSAA and all of its resources first, because in those months after my diagnosis, I was researching like crazy. I was on the computer all the time and reading as much as I could about MS. And MSAA would always pop up, and I would see that they had so many different resources. They had a cooling program, wheelchair assistance, and just information about MS that I found extremely useful. And then it wasn't until later, perhaps I was on Instagram, I think, when I saw that there was the art showcase. And so after that, I think I was shy the first year. So I didn't submit anything. Like 2018, I was really shy. And so then 2019, I started thinking, okay, let's get the ball rolling. Let's just put myself out there again. Stop being so shy. So I did it. I'm so happy I did.
Well, so are we, Hannah. And I love hearing that it was actually the MSAA Art Showcase that gave you that push you needed, gave you that encouragement to get out there again, to start exhibiting your work again.
What drew me to the art showcase was the fact that it was specifically MS artists. And that itself was empowering, because finally I could see that, yes, there are other artists out there who experience very similar things to me. They have an MS diagnosis. They understand what it's like to be an artist. So that in and of itself, like all I did was I read a bunch of bios from all sorts of different people. I got to see their artwork. I got to see what they're going through in life, and that was empowering. I absolutely love the MSAA focuses on the artists themselves.
Well, let's focus on your art. The first time you were featured in the MSAA Art Showcase was in 2020. There are 3 beautiful pieces featured in your gallery, but is there one in particular that has the most significance to you personally?
So They Might Want to Fall is a very significant piece for me, especially in those first few months after I was diagnosed. That's when I was trying to, find myself again. And I actually have it right here. This one. So I had tried to be comfortable with letting the watercolors do what they're going to do, and then working off of that later with my pen. So just sort of teeter-tottering off of what is already there. So I started off with the watercolor, put that in there, let it do what it was going to do. And then I took a look at the watercolor and tried to figure out what this painting should be. What does it want to be? And to me, it wanted to be a cascading cliff. So I see a lot of rocks. Some rocks are falling down, and then they just sort of turn into these little plant life. I like to think of it as plant life or vines or something. And it became that. I am inspired by nature. I love the textures that I see, the forms that I see on rocks, the way the plants interact with the rocks. And so that's what inspired this piece right here. The title, however, They Might Want to Fall. I put those little circles there as a last resort because I didn't really know where to take it after that. But I started thinking to my head, maybe these rocks have a personality. Maybe they're just sort of thinking about the future. Maybe these rocks, maybe they don't know if they should fall off, maybe because they don't know what's going to happen in the future. So as I was doing this, these rocks right here, the smallest ones at the top, are just waiting in line. So, and then we have these guys right here, also kind of waiting, but kind of like wondering, about the future. And then this rock right here, the one at the very edge, this one's the one that's really thinking about whether or not it should take the leap and should it do it. And after that, I drew this one right here, this one line, the very top line that sort of is starting to unfurl, I guess. This line used to be a rock. And so it's now becoming something much more beautiful. So it turns out in my mind, all of these little lines that came down here used to be these rocks, and now they're turning into plant formations and new life. And that was the idea. It's that whole idea that you don't know if you should take the lead, you don't know if you can do it, but once you do it, it usually turns out to be okay.
What an inspiring little piece. And what a great example of how sometimes a work just takes on a life of its own and goes somewhere you didn't expect or anticipate before you started it. So Hannah, is there a piece you can share that isn't already in the art showcase, but we might see there in the future?
This piece right here, this is unfinished, okay? But I have a pet pufferfish, and he's 12 years old. All right. He's a very old fish. I've had him for that long. And so I would like to, my goal right now is to memorialize him right now while I can in my artwork. So I have this, it's alcohol inks on canvas. So alcohol inks on canvas with a little bit of paste, like painter's paste. So it has a texture on it. And so I did the alcohol inks on top of it, and then I created my puffer fish right here in gold alcohol inks. And I sort of I was able to guide the colors using some of the paste, so it sticks up. The texture is in the shape of the puffer fish all around it. Got the fin right here; it's very textured. But I wanted it to be very subtle. I wanted him to blend in with his surroundings because, you know, he's a puffer fish and he is very bright. He does stand out, but I think in the wild he does blend in. So it's unfinished because I wanted to do something with acrylic paint on top of the alcohol inks. And I just don't know where to go with it. So I'm just sitting on it.
Well, I can't wait to see the finished product. And thanks so much, Hannah, for sharing your talent and your art with us tonight. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing to the folks watching tonight before we wrap things up?
Thank you. I just always like to encourage people to, you know, push their limits, but within boundaries, of course. You know, I don't know. I never liked to tell my disease that I can't do it. I never liked to sort of give in, you know, even though sometimes I do need to make a compromise. That is true. Because if you're fatigued, then you have to lay down. There's nothing you can do about that. But I like to at least try to make a compromise with my disease. And so that's how I was able to push through my whole art making process. It's because I make compromises on a daily basis and just have to roll with the punches, because that's what MS makes you do. You have to roll with the punches if you're ever going to live the life that you want to live. That's all I say.
Great way to end the interview portion of our show tonight. Thanks again, Hannah. And thank you to all of our artists tonight, Lisa, Ted, Alfred, Michelle, and of course, Hannah Garrison. As promised, we have a couple artists with us tonight to take your questions and join in on a live discussion. Lisa Dominic is here, as well as Hannah Garrison. And before we do that, I just wanted to remind everybody, as I mentioned before Hannah's interview, Hannah is the mission honoree for this year's Improving Lives Benefit 2022. I can't think of a more deserving recipient. And mark your calendars, because there's not one, but two ways to participate in the annual Improving Lives Benefit. There will be a live in-person event in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on May 5th at the Barnes Foundation, and a virtual event on May 12th. The first 500 virtual registrants will get a free gift if they sign up by May 1st. And we are happy to announce that Tyler Campbell will be returning to host both events again this year. I mentioned that Hannah is the mission honoree, but we are also proud to announce that the corporate honoree this year is the CEO of Publicis Health, our sponsor for tonight's program, Alexandra Von Plato. As we mentioned earlier, Hannah has been a part of the ILTA series since its inception, and Alex has been sponsoring the event since the very beginning as well. So once again, there couldn't be two more deserving recipients to be named this year's honorees. So go to engage.mymsaa.org/benefit 2022. I know that's a very long URL, so I'm sure Jen or Rebecca are going to post that in the chat. And you can get more information at those links and more information as well. So, all right, I am going to take the spotlight off of my video so we can talk to some of the artists here tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Lisa and Hannah to unmute their videos and the audio. And now we do have some questions. Hey, Hannah. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to see you. It looks like you changed your clothes from our interview.
Yes. I'm still sitting
I
in the
guess
same chair though.
great. I should tell everybody to dress the same as you did before with our pre-recorded interview, so we can fool people and make them think it's all live. And Hannah, how are you this evening?
I'm doing really good. Thank you. I'm glad to be able to watch what everybody says about their artwork and their process, and being able to show their works for MSAA. It's all very inspiring.
I
Yeah, I
totally
agree.
agree.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Lisa. And I think the unexpected surprised guest star of the show tonight, Hannah, was Puffy at the very end here. There was lots of surprised viewers tonight.
I think I got his age wrong, by the way. He's actually going to be 14 this year. 14-year-old
12.
fish. He's my baby. my teenager.
That's yeah. What is do fish have years like dog years or?
It's a good question. I don't know that, and to be perfectly honest, like I won't spend too much time talking about my fish, okay? But he has his own personality, and not too much about him has changed over the 14 years. So it's just been incredible to watch. He's just
That's
been
really
a happy,
cool.
he's just been a happy fish this whole time.
And he looks like a great subject for paintings. I don't know how you got him to stay still for that long while you were painting him, but
He's good practice. He's really good practice, like painting fast subjects. I just need my fish for that.
Perfect. Well, listen, we have a couple questions we can get to tonight. Before we do that, though, I do want to, as promised earlier, want to do some shout outs for some of the people viewing tonight. I asked people to put in the chat where they're viewing from. I mentioned I'm coming to you live from Rome, Italy. It is 2:30 on Wednesday morning, so I am broadcasting from the future to all of you back there in the States. But we also have Jen from Haddon Township, New Jersey, Shanna from Los Angeles, California, another one of our MSAA Art Showcase artists. Hannah from San Antonio, Texas. Rebecca from Matawan, New Jersey. New Jersey is always well represented here. Gina from Monmouth County. Tori and Merrill from NYC. I hope they're still there. I know it's getting a little late there for Tori. Then Eileen Dillon, another MSAA Art Showcase artist from Denver, Colorado. San Francisco, California is in the house tonight. Tavi,
Hey.
Thank you for coming. And Anne from Atlanta. Also, we had a good representation of other artists. I mentioned Shanna Stern. Eileen Dillon was here tonight. Maria Sammartino. All three of those artists will be featured next month in our art showcase virtual tour. So
Can't wait.
lots of support tonight from your fellow artists. Bean Fairbanks is the other artist who will be featured in April as well. So maybe a lightning round of questions here. Lisa, I'll start with you. One of the questions that came through was what, not who, what is your biggest inspiration? Do you have something that always inspires you no matter what?
You know, I would have to say I'm constantly chasing the light. If I see, kind of like Ted with his photography, like when I see something lit up, I feel compelled almost to like capture that stop and keep it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would agree. The third piece, Hannah, I think you commented on how amazing the clouds are.
The landscape, yeah.
The landscape, exactly. When you see those like dramatic clouds on a vast landscape, it just stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
Hannah, what about you? Anything what's your one thing that you always draw inspiration from?
Well, I suppose color would be the big overarching umbrella. to that. Gosh, it's really hard to explain it because I love seeing the way colors layer and interact with one another and with other mediums. Just, yeah, I guess that's the simplest way to put it. The way colors interact with their environment. Maybe that's a way to say it. Like perhaps the way the light shines through a window, maybe that'll, and the way it shines through the window, but also the way the shadows look all around it, and the way the color of the paint of the wall looks when the light shines through. Things like that. It always just comes down to color, usually.
Right. I have to, I'm thinking of a quote about color, but I'm going to have to look it up during one of your answers. But so this other question, I noticed when I read the question that really nobody really talked tonight about one particular artist that maybe was their favorite or their hero growing up or when you first started your artistic journey. Hannah, I'll start with you this time. Do you have one artist in particular? It's probably a difficult question, but who is sort of your hero or maybe your first inspiration?
Yeah, there have been lots of artists throughout my years of consciously calling myself an artist. But Vincent van Gogh has always been the one person that has been consistently my favorite artist throughout the years. There's just something about the movement, the line work, the colors that he uses. Once again, going back to colors. I feel like his works are timeless. They just have a sense of importance and a sense of life to them. And I've never been able to replicate it, but I'm getting there. It's my goal.
The good goal to have. Vincent van Gogh is certainly one of mine. I'm lucky to see several Van Goghs every time I'm in the Barnes Foundation, and in particular, knowing his story. And he didn't have MS, but there were certainly health challenges he had to overcome, mental health challenges in order to create his art. And he's just so inspiring. And color was certainly one of his inspirations as well.
Very high aspirations, if you ask me.
It's good to have high aspirations. Lisa, how about you? I know you mentioned Monet during the interview.
I did.
And Sean Cassidy.
Yes. Monet and Hardy Boys fan. Monet, Van Gogh, and I would also say Cezanne. And a lot of that also goes to color and landscape and taking chances, like with doing new things that maybe aren't, what everybody else is doing around, Yeah. So, yeah. And Van Gogh, Hannah, I love Monet from the Parasol with both Van Gogh and Monet. I think I learned from one of the art events, Joe, had definite challenges. Monet was losing his vision, and right. And Van Gogh had suffered with the depression. But he also, aside from color, he really tried to pop light in there, which fascinates me. It might be because of his depression. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and the color yellow in particular, he was also a very big, we were talking with Hannah before the start of the event tonight about the painting Starry Night, but using texture. Hope Angel, our art showcase artist who's leading a couple of the paint along events now, was using the palette knife. But yeah, so texture, color. Michelle Roman's piece, the Just Be, the girl with the hand on her head. I wrote in the chat that it reminded me of Matisse, but he also had use color very expressively and
Yeah.
Emotionally. Which,
Mhm.
speaking of Monet, very quickly, they said that the quote I was trying to remember is by Monet. It's part of a much longer quote, but I love this first sentence where he says, "Color is my day-long obsession, joy and torment."
Oh,
My
wow.
day-long obsession, joy and torment. I don't know. Something about that just sums up, I think, Monet's character perfectly. So I'm sure all of you can relate.
I can
So,
relate to that for sure.
I can relate to that, like a blessing and a curse at the same time. Like, oh.
Yeah.
obsession, a joy, and a torment. Exactly. Well, see, I think maybe we'll go ahead and end. Someone did ask, how did you have to adjust your painting style after your MS diagnosis? I think both of you covered that pretty well during the interviews tonight. But I know that, gosh, all the artists tonight have used several mediums. Lisa, I know in your paintings, they were all acrylics. Is that correct?
No, I usually paint in oil.
Oil, okay.
Yeah, I like oil, but I have tried watercolors and gouache recently, and I'm finding that to be very, interesting too. But I like the
Okay.
oils just because I can go from location if I'm doing it in plein air and bring it home and continue to work. They're a little bit more forgiving than the other mediums. Yeah, I really like the oils.
Yeah. So the question, I don't think I read the question actually. It's what's your favorite medium to use if you use several? So out of gouache, acrylics, and oil, is oil still your favorite?
Yeah. Oil is still my
Okay.
favorite right now. I'm always open to try new things though.
Yeah, there's plenty of mediums to try.
Yes.
How about you, Hannah? I know
Yeah.
you have several mediums sometimes in one painting. Is there a particular favorite?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that the answer to that depends on when you ask me, because I'm very, very, I'm very, very instinctual. So the types of medium that I use really depend on my state of mind at the time. Because as I mentioned in my interview, I like to sort of, what's the word? I like to, I guess, go with the medium that will help my MS or help my state of mind the best, with the best results. So sometimes crayon, actually, like plain old Crayola crayons, something, those will be the best choice for me at the time because of my state of mind, because crayons will allow me to scribble. I love scribbling. But I just love taking things back to more of a childlike state, because when I was going through my MS diagnosis and just sort of like grappling with everything, I felt like a child, like, because so much of your sense of self is stripped away. So it just felt right to go back to that in terms of art and art medium. And I haven't changed much since, because it just fits. And because I'm very instinctual, if I need to scrape a little bit of acrylic paint across a piece of paper, and if that helps my mind, then that's what I do. But I do have to say alcohol inks are really high up on the list. If I need to choose one, maybe alcohol inks could be one of them.
Maybe I'll have to try them.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Michelle Roman also, well, she mentioned that one of the pieces, the first piece that we showed, it looked like an eruption of color, is alcohol inks. It didn't make it into the full interview, but she talked at length about how she really is enjoying using alcohol inks. So, and I had even asked her, I said, I'm not really familiar with that, and can you tell me more? But for the sake of time, we had to, that'll be in the director's cut someday. But Hannah, real quick, before we wrap up, I do want to mention it looks like Meryl and Tori are still on. Meryl wrote that Tori stayed up late tonight. It is a school night, just because she wanted
Aw.
to see you. I'm not sure if she's still up or not. It's a few messages back, but maybe you could give a shout out to Tori for. Up, Meryl
That's
said she's still up.
awesome.
She's still up. Oh, hi, Tori. Oh my goodness. I miss seeing you in class. I'm so glad that you're able to stay up, Tori, and watch everything with us. Thanks for
I'm going to
being
see if I
here. Thanks for
can.
calling us, Meryl.
Let's see if I can invite Meryl and Tori on very quickly.
Aw.
Okay. Second.
There you are.
Oh,
Hi, everyone.
hi.
Thank
Hey,
you.
girly.
Hi.
How's it going? I see you reading a book there.
And thank you, Lisa. Yeah, she's
Is-
getting into
Oh.
bed.
Oh, nice. Nice. Is it a good book?
Yeah, I love it.
Nice. Nice. I need to get back into reading. Good on you for that.
Thank you both. We loved the talks today and hearing how MS inspired everything and seeing the
Aw.
beautiful artwork. And Hannah, you showed something right at the beginning. It was like long with some colors on the side, sort of. It was gorgeous. I was like, oh, please do this one of the future paint-a-lines.
Oh, was
That might
was
have
it
been
the
the
one with-
painting of Puffy.
Was it this one?
Oh.
Was this it?
Let me spotlight you, Hannah. So
Did this look like it
Yes,
was it?
that was it.
Puffy.
Yes. This is
We
the
loved
one
it.
with my puffer fish Puffy, and you can kind of see him there. He makes regular appearances in my artwork, and I won't take up too much time, but Tori, I hope this makes you smile. I made a little drawing of Puffy up close. This is very much one of those instances where I needed to refocus and reorganize my state of mind. So markers was the theme of the day, was the medium of the day for me. So I hope you like it, Tori.
I love it.
Thank you.
Aw.
Thank you. It's my fish. I love him.
That's cool. We love
yeah,
animals.
Meryl and Tori, thank you. Especially
Thank
Tori,
you,
thank you for
guys.
staying up late and taking time out of your bedtime story.
Yeah, and we'll see you in a
Hope it was
few
worth
weeks.
it.
Yes. We'll see you at
Fantastic.
the next one. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. And hey, I will just take a moment once again to thank Hannah and Lisa for staying up late as well and joining us for the live discussion. Thank you so much, Hannah and Lisa. And of course, another thank you to all of the artists tonight as well, Michelle, Alfred, and Tom. So I think that is bringing to a close our first virtual tour of the Spring 2022 series. And make sure that you mark your calendars, come back in April to see the final virtual tour of the Spring series. And stay creative and keep creating. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.